Julian Croft did not value things, he valued metrics. He saw the world not as a collection of objects, people, and places, but as a vast, interconnected spreadsheet of assets and liabilities. His office, 50 stories above the city, was a testament to this philosophy. It was less a room than a declaration, a space of cold marble, polished chrome, and glass that framed the sprawling urban grid below as another dataset to be parsed and monetized. He stood before this window, not admiring the view, but mentally liquidating the real estate it represented. His suit, a tailored charcoal wool that cost more than most people's cars, was not for comfort but for effect, an armor of perceived value. He turned as his assistant, Annalise, entered. She moved with a quiet efficiency that Croft appreciated, as it wasted no billable seconds. "The quarterly asset reconciliation," she began, holding a tablet. "We're down to the final line item. Project Chimera." Croft waved a dismissive hand, his eyes still on the tablet in her hands. He did not need to look up. "The defunct automotive skunk works from the Sterling Radcliffe acquisition. I thought we wrote that off last year." "We wrote off the intellectual property as non-performing," Annalise clarified, her tone meticulously neutral. "This is the physical remainder. A dozen shipping containers and some heavy machinery on a leased lot in the valley. The lease is up. They're classifying it as industrial scrap." Croft finally looked at her, his expression one of profound irritation, as if she had brought a piece of trash into his sterile environment. "Scrap. Then sell it as scrap. What is the book value?" -50,000, factoring in transport and site cleanup. A muscle twitched in Croft's jaw. "So it's a liability. Get rid of it. I don't care how. Auction it, give it away, pay someone to haul it off. Just make it disappear from my books before the end of the quarter. I want that line to read 0." He turned back to the window, the conversation already erased from his mind. He was now contemplating the futures market for rare earth metals. Annalise stood for a moment, the tablet feeling heavy in her hands. The word chimera seemed to possess a weight that the spreadsheet could not capture, but she knew better than to voice such a nebulous concern. Her job was to execute, not to question. She nodded to his unseeing back and left the room. Miles away, in a world that operated on principles of grease, steel, and tangible reality, Elias Vance was recalibrating the variable valve timing on a 20-year-old engine. His garage was not large, but it was immaculate. Every tool hung in its designated place, silhouetted on a pegboard. The concrete floor was swept clean, free of the usual grime that coated such places. It was a space of order and purpose. Elias worked with an unhurried, deliberate grace. His hands, though calloused, moved with the precision of a surgeon's. He did not wrestle with the machine, he conversed with it in a language of torque wrenches and feeler gauges. At a small, sturdy wooden desk in the corner, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was drawing. She had her father's quiet intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration as she shaded the sky in a picture of a house and a tree. The only sounds were the soft scratch of her crayon on paper, the intermittent, satisfying click of Elias's wrench, and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. This was their sanctuary, the small, stable world Elias had built after his old one had been dismantled. He had once been a lead systems engineer, a designer of futures, but now he was a mechanic. And a father. To him, the latter was a far more important title. He paused, wiping his hands on a clean rag, and looked over at Lily. She looked up, felt his gaze, and gave him a small, serious smile. He smiled back. This was his metric for success. It was not a number on a spreadsheet. It was the quiet, peaceful rhythm of this room. Elias had not always lived in this small, quiet world. There was a time before, a time of titanium alloys and proprietary code, of late nights spent chasing the ghost of an idea in a state-of-the-art research facility. He had been the chief architect of Project Chimera at Sterling Radcliffe, a venture so advanced it was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones within the industry. It was not just an electric car, it was a complete rethinking of personal mobility. A modular, self-balancing battery system, a powertrain with near-zero energy loss, and a control system so sophisticated it bordered on prescient. Elias held 3 key patents on the core technology, his name etched onto the very soul of the machine. He remembered the day the acquisition was announced. Julian Croft's private equity firm, Argentum Capital, had bought Sterling Radcliffe in a leveraged buyout. The engineers and researchers had been cautiously optimistic, hoping for a new infusion of capital. Instead, they got a team of accountants. Men in sharp suits walked the labs with clipboards, their eyes scanning over marvels of engineering with blank indifference. They did not see innovation, they saw burn rates and capital expenditure. Within 6 months, Project Chimera was officially classified as a non-performing speculative asset. The team was disbanded. The labs were shuttered. The prototypes and all their supporting hardware were packed into shipping containers and moved to a forgotten backlit, their potential value reduced to a line item that irritated men like Julian Croft. The corporate dismantling had coincided with a personal one. Elias's wife, Elena, had lost her fight with a long illness just weeks after he lost his job. The twin collapses of his professional and personal worlds had left him hollowed out, adrift in a sea of broken promises and unrealized futures. Staring at his young daughter, who had just lost her mother, Elias made a deliberate choice. He rejected the high-stakes, high-stress world that had ultimately betrayed him. He would not chase another corporate dream. He would not sacrifice his time with Lily for the sake of ambition. He cashed in his meager severance, bought the small garage, and dedicated himself to the tangible, the reparable, the real. He found a quiet satisfaction in fixing what was broken, a solace in his methodical work that the abstract world of corporate R&D had never truly provided. The past only resurfaced through Marcus Thorne. Marcus, a lawyer who had been Elias's friend since their college days, was one of the few people who understood the full scope of what Elias had walked away from. He called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with an energy Elias had not heard in years. "Elias, I was browsing public disposal notices. It's a weird hobby, I know, but you'll want to hear this. Argentum Capital has listed a lot for scrap auction." A pause. "The lot is designated ASL 734. Does that mean anything to you?" Elias froze, a clean spark plug held delicately in his fingers. ASL 734. Asset Storage Lot 734. He had signed the manifests himself. "It's Chimera," he said, his voice quiet. "It's all of it." "That's what I thought," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "They're calling it assorted vehicle chassis, batteries, and electronic components. The minimum bid is $10,000. They think it's junk, Elias. They have no idea. The patents are dormant, but the physical hardware, you know what's in there. They don't." Elias looked around his small, clean garage. It was his life, his peace. This call was a stone thrown into the placid water. "What are you suggesting, Marcus?" "I'm suggesting we buy it," Marcus said simply. "I'll front the cash. I'll set up a shell corporation to handle the bid, keep your name off it completely. This isn't just about the money, Elias. It's about justice, in a way. For you, for the team. For the work itself. They threw it away. Let's pick it up." The worthless asset was located on a sun-bleached expanse of cracked asphalt at the edge of an industrial park. 12 blue shipping containers sat in 2 neat rows, their surfaces coated in a fine layer of dust and neglect. A chain-link fence, topped with rusted barbed wire, enclosed the lot. To any casual observer, it was a graveyard for industrial refuse. This was precisely what Julian Croft saw it as, a minor but irritating blight on his otherwise pristine portfolio of assets. He had approved the auction without a second thought, eager to turn the red ink of the lot's lease and security costs into the clean black of a one-time sale, no matter how small. Annalise was the one sent to oversee the pre-auction viewing. She stood by the gate in a practical pantsuit, her discomfort palpable in the dry, dusty heat. A handful of scrap metal dealers had come and gone, their interest waning after a cursory look. They kicked the tires of the containers, grunted about the cost of hauling, and left. Then, a man in simple work pants and a faded flannel shirt arrived in an old, impeccably maintained pickup truck. It was Elias. Annalise watched him, her initial assessment writing him off as just another small-time hauler. But he did not act like the others. He did not kick anything. He did not estimate tonnage. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the container slowly, his eyes not on the containers themselves, but on the small, faded data plates riveted near the doors. He ran his fingers over the rubber seals of the doors, testing their pliability. He squinted at the small, analog humidity gauges that were still, miraculously, functional on a few of the units. He was reading the history of their storage, not their contents. He spent 20 minutes in silence, a quiet, intense figure against the backdrop of industrial decay. He did not ask to look inside. He did not need to. He knew the precise atmospheric conditions required for the long-term preservation of the lithium polymer battery cells and the sensitive control boards. The intact seals and low humidity readings told him everything he needed to know. The project was not dead. It was sleeping. He approached Annalise, his gaze direct and calm. "I've seen enough." "Are you planning to bid?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her tone. "A bid will be placed," he said, and then he turned and walked back to his truck, leaving her with a strange sense of unease. There was a depth to his brief inspection, a quiet expertise that felt profoundly out of place among the scrap dealers. She dismissed it as an anomaly. The auction was an online formality. There was only one bid, placed in the final hour by a newly registered entity named Phoenix Mechanical Solutions LLC. The amount was exactly $10,000. Annalise called Croft. "Sir, we have a single bid for the Chimera lot. 10,000 inch." On the other end of the line, she heard Croft laugh, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. 10,000. For that pile of garbage? Fantastic. We're $20,000 ahead of our worst-case scenario. Sell it. Get the fool to sign the liability waiver and get those containers off my leased property by the end of the week. The next day, Elias met Annalise at a small, sterile office near the lot. The paperwork was ready. Annalise slid the contract across the table. It was a dense document, filled with clauses that absolved Argentum Capital of any and all responsibility. Elias read it carefully, his silence unnerving Annalise more than any negotiation tactic could have. The men she usually dealt with were loud, posturing creatures who argued over every comma. This man simply read, his expression unreadable. "Everything appears to be in order," he said finally. He signed the documents with a firm, steady hand. Annalise countersigned, her professionalism a thin veneer over her growing curiosity. "The lot is yours. You have 72 hours to remove the assets," she couldn't help but ask. "What do you plan to do with it all?" Elias looked at her, his eyes holding no trace of guile or triumph. "I'm going to fix what's broken." He took the keys to the gate lock, stood up, and walked out of the office. Annalise watched him go, a prickle of doubt running down her spine. She had the distinct, unsettling feeling that her boss had just made a terrible mistake, but she could not articulate why. She had followed her orders. The liability was off the books. On the spreadsheet, it was a victory. The first thing Elias did was not to hire a fleet of trucks. He rented the warehouse adjacent to the storage lot, a vast, dusty space that had been vacant for years. It was an expense, but it was necessary. Moving the containers was risky, moving the workshop to the containers was smart. For 2 days, he worked alone, sweeping the floors, running new electrical conduits, and setting up his own tools and equipment. He transformed a corner of the cavernous building into a smaller, cleaner version of his own garage. Only then, when the environment was controlled, did he approach the containers. He chose a specific one first, C01. He knew the manifest by heart. With a heavy groan of protesting metal, he swung the thick doors open. The air that escaped was cool and dry, smelling faintly of ozone and dormant electronics. There, in the center of the container, shrouded under a heavy, custom-fitted canvas tarp, was the familiar silhouette of the Chimera C1 prototype. It sat on its transport dolly, exactly as he had left it almost 4 years ago. He did not pull the tarp off immediately. He walked to a reinforced case in the corner of the container, unlatched it, and retrieved a ruggedized laptop and a bundle of custom cables. This was his personal diagnostic rig, a tool he had designed and built himself, one that spoke the unique digital language of the Chimera systems. He connected a cable to a small, discrete port near the chassis frame. The laptop screen flickered to life, displaying not a modern graphical interface, but lines of stark, green text scrolling against a black background. He initiated a deep system state query. He watched the data stream, his expression intent. Battery cell voltage, stable. Capacitor charge, nominal decay. Memory module integrity, 100%. The core systems were not damaged or degraded. They were in a state of deep hibernation, a preservation mode Elias himself had designed. A slow smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man meeting an old, dear friend. He finally walked to the prototype, took hold of the tarp, and pulled it back in one smooth, fluid motion. The C1 was a marvel of raw, functional beauty. Its unpainted carbon fiber bodywork absorbed the light, its form dictated by aerodynamics and engineering necessity, not by a stylist's whim. It was perfect. The next day, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to David Chen, a brilliant battery chemist who had been the lead on the Chimera power cell project. After the Sterling Ratcliffe shutdown, David had been relegated to a mind-numbing job testing consumer-grade lithium-ion batteries for a safety compliance firm. The second call was to Maria Flores, a software engineer who had written 500,000 lines of the Chimera's control code. She was now freelancing, designing user interfaces for mobile banking apps. He did not need to persuade them. He said only 5 words, "I have the Chimera prototypes." Silence followed on both calls, a silence pregnant with disbelief and then dawning hope. "Where?" David asked, his voice cracking slightly. "When do you need us?" Maria asked, her tone already shifting from bored freelancer to focused engineer. They arrived 2 days later, walking into the warehouse with expressions of awe. They saw the C1, uncovered and waiting. They saw the neat, organized workspace Elias had built. They saw the open container, a treasure chest of their life's best work. There were no contracts, no salary negotiations. Elias offered them a simple partnership, a stake in whatever they could build from these ashes. They shook hands on it, their pact sealed not with ink, but with a shared sense of purpose and a profound respect for the quiet, methodical men who had brought them back together. What followed was not a flurry of frantic activity, but a period of intense, disciplined work. The warehouse became their monastery. Their days fell into a rhythm dictated by the tasks at hand. David focused on the batteries. He and Elias carefully unsealed the first power module, a sleek, black slab of composites and metal. Inside, the cells were pristine. David began the painstaking process of waking them, using a custom-built cycling rig to slowly bring them back to full operational capacity. It was a delicate, multi-week process that required constant monitoring. A single mistake could render a multi-million-dollar battery array worthless. Maria, meanwhile, dove back into her code. The world had changed in 4 years. She worked with Elias to bridge the Chimera's proprietary operating system with modern communication protocols, allowing the car's brain to talk to a world of smartphones and cloud networks that had barely existed when it was first designed. She sat for hours, sometimes days, surrounded by monitors filled with cascading lines of code, her fingers flying across the keyboard. It was not the frustrating work of app design, it was the profound joy of building a complex, elegant system from the ground up. Elias was the conductor, the master machinist, the systems integrator. He moved between David's battery lab and Maria's coding station, but his primary domain was the machine itself. He fabricated a new coolant pump housing out of a block of billet aluminum because the original seals had hardened. He spent a week rewiring a sensor harness, replacing every connector with military-spec hardware that would last a century. There were minor setbacks. A roof leak in the old warehouse threatened a stack of schematics, forcing them to spend a day patching the roof with tar. A critical diagnostic chip was found to have failed, and Elias had to spend 3 days reverse engineering its function to build a replacement. But there was no drama, no panic. Every problem was met with quiet ingenuity and a shared conviction that there was no challenge they could not overcome. Lily would often come to the warehouse after school, doing her homework at her little desk, now set up near her father's workbench. She learned the names of tools, the smell of clean machine oil, and the quiet hum of focused, meaningful work. She was watching her father rebuild his world, one precisely torqued bolt at a time. After 3 months of relentless, methodical effort, the day came. The Chimera C1 rolled off the transport dolly under its own power for the first time in 4 years. It made almost no sound, just a faint, high-frequency whine from its electric motors and the soft crunch of its tires on the concrete floor. It moved with an unnatural grace, a predator awakened. They had not just restored it, they had improved it. Maria's new code had optimized the power delivery, and David's battery conditioning had unlocked an extra 5% of its total capacity. The car was not a museum piece. It was a statement. It was alive. The validation of their work came from an unexpected quarter. It began with a phone call, not to Elias, but to Marcus Thorne. The caller was the personal assistant to a woman named Evelyn Reed, a notoriously reclusive tech billionaire. Reed was a legend in Silicon Valley, known for two things: her visionary investments in disruptive technologies and her passion for unique, high-performance automobiles. The assistant's voice was strained. "Mr. Thorne, I was given your name by a source in the classic car restoration community. I am told your associate, a Mr. Vance, is a specialist in impossible electrical problems." Marcus, sensing the gravity, put the call on speaker for Elias to hear. "He has some expertise. What is the issue?" "Miss Reed owns a Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute, one of only a handful in the world. For the past 6 months, it has been plagued by a ghost electrical fault. The car will randomly enter a limited power mode. We have had it at 9 different certified Koenigsegg service centers across North America and Europe. They have replaced the main computer, the wiring harness, the battery management system. Nothing has worked. Their combined quotes just to continue the diagnostic process now exceed $290,000. They are, to put it bluntly, stumped." Elias listened, his expression unchanged. A Jesko. A masterpiece of internal combustion engineering, but also a labyrinth of complex, interconnected electronic systems. "Send the car," Elias said, his voice calm and clear over the speaker. There was a surprised silence on the other end. "To your associate's garage." "Yes," Elias confirmed. A week later, a climate-controlled, unmarked black transporter arrived at the warehouse. Evelyn Reed, eschewing her usual privacy, had come with it. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She watched as her multi-million-dollar hypercar was carefully unloaded into Elias's stark, industrial space. Her skepticism was a palpable force in the room. "Mr. Vance," she said, her tone polite but probing. "My people have spent thousands of hours on this problem. What makes you think you can solve it?" Elias did not answer with words. He walked around the car once, his eyes taking in its form. Then he gestured for the transporter's driver to start the engine. The massive V8 roared to life, a thunderous, angry sound that filled the warehouse. Elias simply stood beside it and listened. He did not connect a standard diagnostic tool. He placed a hand on the carbon fiber bodywork over the rear wheel, closing his eyes for a moment as if feeling for a vibration. He had David bring him a small, custom-built oscilloscope with a needle-thin probe. He knelt, reached under the car, and touched the probe to a specific point on the main power bus casing. He watched the wave patterns on the small screen for a few minutes. The entire process, from the engine starting to him standing back up, took 14 minutes. He turned to Evelyn Reed. The engine was still idling, a rumbling volcano of power. "Turn it off," he said. Once the silence returned, he spoke. "It's a resonance cascade in the primary bus controller. The firmware that manages the alternator's charging frequency is creating a harmonic conflict with the fuel pump's power cycle. It only happens under specific thermal and electrical load conditions. It creates a feedback loop that tricks the main ECU into thinking there's a critical voltage drop, so it triggers limp mode to protect itself. The manufacturer's diagnostic tools are designed to check for component failure, not systemic conflict. They can't see it." Evelyn Reed stared at him, her skepticism melting away into stunned comprehension. For months, the world's best technicians had been looking for a broken part. Elias had listened for a discordant note in the symphony. "Can you fix it?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I need to write a kernel-level patch for the controller firmware," Elias said. "It will take me 2 days." He named a price that was less than a tenth of what she had already spent on failed diagnostics. He delivered the car back to her in exactly 2 days, not just fixed, but subtly improved. The throttle response was smoother, the power delivery more linear. He had taken the liberty of optimizing the code while he was in it. Evelyn Reed was more than impressed, she was intrigued. This was not the work of a mechanic, it was the work of a master engineer. "What is it you really do here, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her gaze sweeping past the Jesko to the tarp-covered shape of the Chimera C2 prototype in the corner. Elias did not boast. He simply told her the story of Project Chimera. Then, he pulled the cover off the C1. He walked her through the technology, the battery system, the powertrain, the code. He did not try to sell her anything. He simply explained the work. Reed listened, her sharp eyes absorbing every detail. When he was finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I don't want to buy your prototype, Mr. Vance. I want to fund your company. I want to help you build these. Not just cars, but the entire powertrain platform. Let's create a new standard." She named a figure, an initial investment in the tens of millions, that made Marcus Thorne, who was present for the discussion, nearly choke. The deal was sketched out on a whiteboard and finalized by their lawyers within a week. It was done quietly, without press releases or public announcements. Vance Electrodynamics was born not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a perfectly balanced machine. The news, when it finally broke, did so in the glossy pages of Future Automotive Technology, the industry's most respected journal. The cover was a dramatic shot of the Chimera C1, its raw carbon fiber gleaming under studio lights. The headline was stark, "The Ghost of Chimera, How a Lost Super Project Was Reborn from the Scrap Heap." The article was a deep dive, meticulously researched. It lauded the revolutionary powertrain, detailed the elegance of the battery architecture, and praised the genius of the small, unknown team that had brought it to life. It named Elias Vance as the original architect and the current CEO of the new boutique firm, Vance Electrodynamics. Crucially, it mentioned the company's powerful new backer, Evelyn Reed. And in a single, devastating paragraph, it traced the technology's recent history. The hardware for the project was acquired for a nominal sum earlier this year, after being deemed scrap by Argentum Capital, the private equity firm that had dismantled the original Sterling Ratcliffe R&D division. Julian Croft was in a board meeting when Annalise entered, breaking protocol. She did not say a word. She simply placed the open magazine on the polished mahogany table in front of him. He glanced down, annoyed at the interruption. His eyes caught the headline. Then the name, Argentum Capital. He picked up the magazine, his annoyance shifting to confusion, then to a cold, sinking dread. He read the paragraph, then read it again. The blood drained from his face. Scrap, nominal sum, the memory of the phone call, his own dismissive laughter, echoed in his mind. He looked at Annalise, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. She met his gaze, her expression a mixture of fear and grim confirmation. The fool who had signed the papers wasn't some backwater scrap hauler. It was the project's creator. Croft's fury, when it came, was a cold, silent thing. He did not rage or shout. He went back to his office and pulled every file related to the Sterling Ratcliffe acquisition. He saw the original valuation reports that had flagged Project Chimera as a high-risk, high-reward venture. He saw the notes from the bean counters who had recommended its termination to save a few million in operating costs. He saw his own signature on the final directive. He had not made a simple mistake, he had committed a sin of colossal arrogance. He had held a diamond in his hand and, because it was not yet cut and polished, had thrown it in the dirt. He found a scapegoat, of course, a mid-level manager from the acquisition team who had left the company 2 years ago, and made a show of blaming him in a memo. But it was a hollow gesture. Annalise knew who was responsible. And more importantly, Croft knew. A week later, Julian Croft drove his pristine German sedan out to the valley. He found the address from the magazine article. The chain-link fence was gone, replaced by a clean, modern security gate. The old, dilapidated warehouse now had new windows and a fresh coat of paint. It was still understated, but it radiated a sense of quiet, focused purpose. He was met not by a security guard, but by Elias himself, who seemed to have been expecting him. Elias wore the same kind of simple work clothes, his hands clean but his fingernails still bearing the faint traces of honest labor. Croft got out of his car, his expensive suit feeling like a costume in this place of genuine creation. He tried to project his usual aura of command. "Vance. You've been busy." Elias was wiping down a gleaming piece of machinery. He did not stop. "I have." The simple, factual reply disarmed Croft. There was no anger, no triumph in Elias's voice. It was the voice of a man who was simply stating a fact. Croft felt his power slipping away. He was on Elias's turf now, a world of tangible value that he could not manipulate or devalue with financial jargon. "My firm," Croft began, launching into his pre-planned speech, "is prepared to make a significant investment in your company. A partnership. We have the global logistics, the marketing infrastructure. We can scale this in a way Reed's boutique approach never will. It was an offer of power, a chance to reclaim a piece of what he had thrown away. Elias finally stopped his work. He set the tool down carefully, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned to face Croft. His gaze was level and calm. "I'm not looking for a partner," he paused, his eyes unwavering. "Especially one who mistakes a diamond for a piece of glass. Your firm had its chance with this technology. You failed to see its value. Why would I trust your judgment now?" The rejection was absolute, delivered not with malice, but with the simple, irrefutable logic of a master craftsman who refuses to use a faulty tool. There was nothing more to say. Croft, for the first time in his adult life, was speechless. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. He was the one asking for something. And the answer was no. He got back in his car, the silence of his retreat a deafening admission of defeat. Vance Electrodynamics did not become a global behemoth. That was never Elias's goal. It remained a lean, focused, and fiercely independent company. Under the guidance of Evelyn Reed's strategic counsel and fueled by her capital, they did not mass-produce cars. Instead, they perfected the Chimera powertrain and battery systems, licensing the technology to a select group of high-end automotive and aerospace companies. They became the quiet gold standard, the name whispered among engineers when they spoke of ultimate efficiency and performance. Elias remained the CEO, but his office was a desk in the corner of the main workshop. He still spent most of his days with his hands on the hardware, solving problems and refining designs alongside David and Maria. One afternoon, a year after Croft's visit, a flatbed truck delivered a large, simple sign. It was made of brushed stainless steel, with a single word precisely laser-cut into it, Vance. Elias directed the workers to hang it not on a towering pylon by the road, but discreetly on the front of the building. It was not a boast, it was a simple statement of identity, as understated and confident as the man himself. His success was real, earned, and entirely on his own terms. He had not become the thing he defeated. The story concluded not in a boardroom or on a trading floor, but in the quiet of the workshop after everyone else had gone home. Elias was at a workbench, showing Lily how a spectrum analyzer worked, its screen displaying the clean, stable energy signature of one of their new battery cells. He was explaining the concept of harmonic resonance, using the same words he had used to diagnose Evelyn Reed's hypercar. Lily listened with a serious expression, her young mind absorbing the principles of a world built on logic, precision, and care. Julian Croft remained in his office high above the city, surrounded by his wealth. But something had broken in him. He would forever be the man who had a fortune in his hands and threw it away for the price of scrap. His world of metrics had failed him, revealing itself as a fragile, superficial construct. He had the money, the status, the power, but he had lost the one thing that truly mattered, the recognition of true value. Elias Vance, in his clean, quiet workshop, surrounded by his life's work and the daughter who was his life's meaning, had everything. He had remained the same quiet, methodical man, his victory not a conquest, but a validation of his core belief, that substance will always, eventually, triumph over surface, and that the greatest value lies not in what you own, but in what you can create.